sand came alive without warning. One moment, the desert stretched empty and dead beneath the pale sun of Kesthara. The next, it writhed with columns of wind, dragging miles of fine, rust-colored grit across the horizon like a rolling wall of fire. A low, pulsing moan rippled through the air, vibrating in the bones more than the ears. Perrin Maddox dropped to one knee, squinting westward through the tinted visor of his helmet. He could barely make out the others, three aliens only slightly taller than himself, their elongated forms darting in frantic zigzags toward the crawler transport parked a few hundred meters away. The creatures moved with raw panic, their sleek suits flaring with the faint blue glow of internal distress signals. "Rel, don't run straight, cut north." Perrin shouted into the comm, but only static answered. The storm's interference was already chewing through their signal range. He looked back at the hover crate he'd been unloading. Supplies from the scout pod lay scattered in the sand, hydro packets, signal beacons, a foldable solar panel ripped half out of its casing. He hesitated, then yanked the emergency gear bag from the crate and slung it over his shoulder. The wind hit like a train. It wasn't just air, it was thousands of particles moving with the force of a jet engine, a solid wall of grit that pelted his suit and knocked him sideways. He stumbled, catching himself on a knee, coughing against the filtered oxygen pumping through his helmet. The storm was faster than anything they predicted. He turned just in time to see one of the aliens, Vero, get swallowed by the storm. The creature's silhouette blurred, then vanished completely in the haze. Another, Tyvan, was almost to the crawler. The last, Rel, had veered off course, stumbling in blind loops, disoriented. "Rel, I've got gear here." Perrin waved one arm, but the alien was too far and the wind too strong. The crawler's engine roared to life. For a moment, Perrin thought they were going to wait. The vehicle hovered, nosing toward Rel. Then it pivoted east, away from the storm, and accelerated. "They're leaving him," Perrin muttered. He could barely believe it, but there it was. The crawler tore away at full speed, disappearing into the haze. He turned back toward his own position. His legs were already sinking slightly into the fine powder of the desert. The wind was stripping the landscape down to a smooth blur. No way he could run in this. No way he could outrun it like the others tried. Perrin yanked open the gear bag and dropped to the ground, pulling a thermal blanket over his head. It flapped wildly in the wind as he crawled to the hover crate and wedged himself behind it, using the box as a windbreak. He grabbed the emergency shovel and started digging. Digging fast. The top layer of sand was loose, but below that it was packed tighter, easier to shape. He didn't need deep, just deep enough. He carved out a shallow pit, dragged the crate over the top, and wedged it in place at an angle using the shovel's handle. Then he crawled underneath, dragging the edges of the thermal blanket around the sides to seal it. He barely managed to jam himself into the tiny hollow before the storm hit full force. The sound was deafening. Sand roared over the crate like a waterfall. Every gust made the shelter groan, the shovel handle creaking under the weight. Perrin curled into a ball, breathing shallowly, trying to ignore the sharp pricks of dust that still found their way through the smallest cracks. The temperature dropped quickly, the storm sucking heat away like a vacuum. He checked his suit's vitals. Oxygen flow was stable, but his body temp was dropping fast. He turned on the internal heater's low setting, conserve energy. He had no idea how long the storm would last. He tapped the comm again. "Rel? Tyvan? Vero? Anyone?" Nothing. He waited an hour. 2. The storm didn't let up. By the 6th hour, the wind had buried the crate in sand. The shelter groaned under the pressure, the makeshift roof bowing slightly. Perrin shifted carefully, testing the edges. Still holding. He drifted in and out of sleep, waking every time the crate shifted or the wind howled louder. By the 12th hour, the oxygen reserves were dipping. He popped a fresh capsule into the regulator and checked his water ration. Only 2 packets. He tore one open through his helmet's intake port and sipped slowly, forcing himself to stop halfway through. The storm raged for 16 hours. When it finally began to die, it did so without warning. The wind dropped from a scream to a whisper in minutes. Perrin waited another hour before he began digging upward. The crate was almost completely buried. He pushed upward until he broke the surface, then crawled out into the strange, muffled silence of the post-storm desert. Everything was changed. The landscape had been flattened. The dunes were gone. The rocky outcrops softened into smooth hills of red powder. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the endless plain. There was no sign of the crawler. No footprints. No wreckage. Perrin activated his beacon, but the signal was weak. The storm had likely fried the relay tower on their scout pod. He needed elevation and shelter. His suit was holding, but he wouldn't last another night exposed. He scanned the horizon and spotted a jagged rock formation about a kilometer away. He packed what supplies he could, slung the gear bag over his shoulder, and started walking. The sand was soft, and every step sank a little. It took him over an hour to reach the rocks. The formation was better than he'd hoped, a shallow alcove at the base, enough to shield him from the wind. He cleared the entrance, set up the emergency thermal sheet as a windbreak, and started unpacking. He had 1 solar lantern, 1 power cell, 3 water purification tablets, and a flare gun with 2 rounds. He also had a small collapsible toolkit. He pulled the tools out, sat down, and started thinking. If the others had made it through the storm, they'd circle back. If not, then he needed to be ready for a longer stay. He spent the next day reinforcing the alcove, building small rock walls to trap heat, burying the crate deeper to serve as a makeshift storage unit. He used the thermal blanket to create a layered sleeping area and rationed his water carefully. On the 3rd day, he heard a sound, distant, mechanical. He scrambled to the edge of the rocks, staring out over the sand. A scout drone. Low flying, damaged, its stabilizers whining. It buzzed past, trailing smoke. Perrin fired a flare. The drone veered, then crashed into the sand a few hundred meters west. He ran. The drone's casing was cracked, but the data core was intact. With effort, he extracted it and hauled it back to his shelter. He spent the entire night wiring it into his beacon, boosting the signal. By morning, the beacon was transmitting at triple range. He waited. 2 more days passed. On the 6th day, a flicker of movement on the horizon, then a ship, low and slow, descending. It wasn't the crawler. It was a rescue craft. The door opened. A tall alien stepped out, skin pale, eyes dark. "Perrin Maddox?" it asked. Perrin nodded. "You are the only surviving member of Survey Group Theta 9. Perrin looked at the desert, then back at the alien. "Then let's not waste that," he said. He climbed aboard. The first thing Perrin noticed about the interior of the rescue ship was the temperature. It was cold, not desert night cold, but clinical, like a place where things were meant to be preserved, not comforted. The walls were a dull metallic green, softly illuminated by lines of embedded bioluminescence that pulsed in rhythm with some unseen engine. The air carried a faint antiseptic tang, something between ozone and citrus rind. The alien who had greeted him didn't speak again. It led him past a bulkhead into a narrow passageway, where a second, broader being waited. This one had scales that shimmered in overlapping hues, and a set of mechanical arms folded against its back. "Human Perrin Maddox. I am tasked with your medical assimilation," it said, scanning him from head to foot with a device that resembled a tuning fork mated with a stethoscope. "I already ran full diagnostics 2 nights ago. Patched myself up," Perrin muttered, but the alien was already placing a cold disc against his neck. "Thermoregulatory instability. Mild dehydration. Foreign particulates in respiratory tract. Subcutaneous bruising. You are compromised. I'm breathing and walking. That's good enough." The scale-covered medic turned and clicked through a panel on the wall. A slab rose from the floor beside it, unfolding into a clinical bed with restraints. "I'm not strapping down," Perrin warned. "You can scan or whatever, but I'm not lying there like a dissected frog. You will comply or deteriorate." "I've deteriorated worse," he said, brushing off a layer of dried grit from his sleeve. "Tell you what, you take a blood draw, I'll let you run whatever test you want. But I'm not losing consciousness again unless something knocks me out." The medic paused, then opened a compartment and extended a set of retractable probes. One slipped into the crook of Perrin's arm before he could flinch. Red fluid filled a transparent capsule, which the alien inserted into the wall. After a moment, a display activated above them. Perrin's physiology scrolled in complex graphs, most of which he couldn't begin to interpret. "Your blood chemistry is incompatible with auto-stabilization," the medic said. Your cells resist reconditioning. That's a compliment where I come from. It is not here. The other alien, the one who had led him aboard, finally spoke again. We found no other survivors. The crawler was located 15 kilometers east, overturned. No life signs. No distress signal. No attempt at recovery. Perrin sat on the edge of a recessed bench, elbows on knees. So they left Rel behind, tried to outrun a storm, and ended up dead anyway. Your analysis is correct. He looked up. You're not even pretending to be diplomatic about it. We calculate probability. Emotion is inefficient in post-mortem evaluation. Sure, but it's pretty damn efficient at motivating people to not leave others behind. The alien tilted its head. Perrin couldn't tell if it was confused or just bored. What's the protocol now? You will be transported to the orbital platform for debriefing. Then reassigned. Reassigned? He asked. I just spent 6 days in a hole trying not to suffocate. You really think I'm going to walk into another death trap without blinking? We do not blink. Your output efficiency remains within acceptable margins. Human adaptability is statistically resilient. Perrin stood. So I'm a statistic now. You are a resource. He turned toward the window slit at the far end of the corridor. The planet's surface was shrinking beneath them, a sea of rust and gray vanishing into the black. He leaned against the cool frame, a resource that just buried 3 alien scientists because they didn't understand how weather works. They understood. They were simply less durable. By the 3rd hour aboard, Perrin had grown tired of the clinical silence. There were no chairs, only embedded perches. No food dispenser he recognized, just a drawer marked with symbols he couldn't read. He fumbled through it, eventually locating a pouch of thick gel that tasted like minty dirt. He forced it down. When the ship docked with the orbital platform, he was ushered through pressurized corridors into a chamber that buzzed faintly with static. A semicircle of observers sat behind a transparent barrier, each encased in a different environmental shell: liquid tanks, vapor clouds, synthetic exosuits. A cluster of nodes in the ceiling tracked his movements. Submit to inquiry, a voice said. It came from everywhere at once. You want a report? Here's your report. Your team panicked, ignored terrain protocols, and left someone behind. I stayed put, used the gear we had, and waited out the storm. That's it. That's the whole story. Clarify your decision not to pursue the crawler. It wasn't a decision. I watched them vanish into a sand wall. I wasn't interested in joining them on a suicide sprint. Did you attempt to rescue the disoriented entity designated Rel? Perrin crossed his arms. I called out. I signaled. The wind swallowed everything. You think I should have run into a zero visibility storm on foot? I chose the option with the highest survival chance. That's what field protocols are for. Your solution was effective, but unexpected. I'm not a drone. I improvise. A pause followed. Then a different voice spoke, softer. Your species exhibits pattern-defying logic under duress. This makes you difficult to model. Welcome to humanity. We're full of surprises. The lights dimmed slightly. A new figure entered the room, tall, with a translucent skin that shimmered like oil on water. It approached the barrier and tapped a long digit against the glass. You will be assigned to the Umbra Traverse Initiative. There is a station in need of adaptive problem solvers. Do I get a say? You are a field-designated survivor. That grants you privilege above standard conscripts. So, I can refuse. You may. But if you do, your return to human-governed space may be delayed indefinitely. Perrin exhaled through his nose, weighing the veiled threat. Fine, I'll take the assignment, but I want my own med kit, unaltered. And I pick my landing gear. Accepted. He was escorted to a staging area where a small vessel waited. It was sleeker than the previous ship, outfitted with modular compartments and a cockpit interface labeled in multiple languages, including English. A quiet voice issued from the console as he strapped in. Welcome, human Perrin Maddox. Navigation to Umbra Base Alpha will begin upon your confirmation. Estimated arrival, 6 standard cycles. 6 days alone? Correct. He leaned back. The seat adjusted automatically. No restraints apparently. They'd learned something about his preferences. As the vessel disengaged and slipped into the launch corridor, Perrin caught a final glimpse of the orbital station. Its structure resembled a spoked wheel floating in the void, each segment rotating independently. Lights flickered along its edges, activity, or maybe just noise. Halfway through the second day, he discovered a hidden panel beneath the console. Inside was a sealed container labeled in 3 languages. He opened it. Coffee. Real ground coffee. He stared at the packet like it was a relic of a long-lost world. Then he laughed loud, genuine, echoing off the cold walls of the ship. "Maybe they are learning," he muttered, and set about finding the water heater. The ship eased out of warp with a low hum, and the stars snapped into clarity. Umbra Base Alpha hung in the distance like a fractured crown, multiple prongs of modular habitat units arranged around a central docking ring, each limb spinning at its own lazy pace. The outer hull looked scorched in places, with welding scars tracing hasty repairs. One section appeared to be held together by tension cables and prayer. Perrin leaned forward, squinting at the structure. "That's the station?" he said aloud. "Yes," the ship responded. "Umbra Base Alpha. Frontier-class deep space outpost. Currently operating at 54% structural integrity." Reassuring. The docking clamp latched with a tremor that shivered through the hull. When the hatch opened, warm air hit his face, stale, slightly metallic, and tinged with something fungal. The corridor beyond was dim, lit only by floor strips and a few flickering overheads. A pair of maintenance drones buzzed past, dragging a scorched panel between them. Waiting near the airlock was a squat alien with 4 short arms and a face like a melted candle. It wore a harness covered in tools and was chewing something that gave off a faint cinnamon smell. "You're the human? Great. You're late. We've had a breach in Habitat 3, half the solar arrays offline, and the waste systems cycling backwards." "Good to see you too," Perrin said, stepping inside. "I'm Tovek. I manage what's left of engineering. You've got 2 hands and a brain, right? Last I checked. Then follow me and don't step on anything that hisses." "That means it's still alive." They passed through a series of corridors that grew progressively more chaotic. Wires dangled like vines. Floor panels were missing in places, exposing ducts and coolant lines. One door was being held shut by a bent crowbar. Tovek stopped beside a bulkhead and kicked a control box. The panel hissed open, revealing a cramped control room with a makeshift command rig built from incompatible tech. A human-sized chair sat in front, surrounded by screens showing flickering readouts and error codes. "Your station," Tovek said. "You'll be running diagnostics, patching software, and telling us when something's about to explode. Isn't that your job?" "My job is to ignore it until it explodes. Yours is to tell me when I can't." Perrin dropped his gear bag beside the chair and studied the interface. Half the screens were jury-rigged from salvaged parts. One was definitely a repurposed food display. "Where's the rest of the crew?" Tovek scratched under one of his eyes. "Quarantined. Biohazard leak 3 weeks ago. They're stable but not conversational. So it's just you? And now you." "Congratulations." By the end of the second hour, Perrin had traced the solar failure to a misaligned inverter array. He suited up, climbed through a vent shaft, and spent 30 minutes realigning the panel using a pry tool, a length of wire, and a wedge of synthetic cheese he found floating near a vent. It worked. 12 hours later, he'd flushed the waste back into the correct direction, rerouted power through a backup relay, and patched a coolant leak with a polymer-infused towel and a heat sealant compound that smelled like burning hair. Tovek watched him reattach a panel with a pair of broken tongs. "You're not certified for any of this, right?" "Nope." "Then how do you know what to do?" "I don't. I do something and see if it breaks less." "That is not comforting." "Welcome to humanity." On the 3rd day, the quarantine chamber released its lock. Perrin followed Tovek to the medbay where 3 figures lay inside isolation pods. All were humanoid, but with different configurations, one with elongated fingers, another with bioluminescent skin, the third with gills along its neck. The medical unit was offline. Perrin crouched beside the panel and started tracing the power feed. He found a burnt capacitor, replaced it with a repurposed stabilizer from a defunct drone, and rerouted the circuit using spare wiring from a defogger. The unit booted up. The pods hissed open. The Guild one sat up first, blinking in confusion. It looked at Perrin, then at the others. "Where is the medical technician?" "Gone," Tovek said. "This one fixed the unit." The being studied Perrin. "You are a human?" "Guilty. You are not trained in xenomedical support." "Nope. But you're breathing again, so..." "You're welcome." The guild being stepped out of the pod, wobbling slightly, then extended a hand. I am Kullish. You have prevented my organ degradation. I try. The other two regained consciousness within the hour. One had suffered mild neurological dissonance. Perrin administered a low-level pulse from the med unit's recalibration device, calibrated by guesswork and a hunch. It worked. By day 5, the station had running power, functioning comms, and a crew no longer entirely incapacitated. Tovek found Perrin in the central junction, patching a coolant valve with scrap aluminum and thermal paste. You know, Tovek said, we've had 3 different species posted here in the last cycle. All of them needed constant instruction. You just do things. Because no one else is doing them. We've been studying humans for decades. You're still unpredictable. Maybe stop trying to predict us. Tovek scratched his chin with a short arm. You're not what I expected. Neither was this assignment. Later that evening, the crew gathered in the common area for a meal. The station's food synthesizer was only capable of producing a thick, gray paste. Perrin had found spices in a forgotten storage locker, dried herbs, packets of something that resembled mustard, and a tin of powdered garlic. He stirred them in. Kullish took a bite, then blinked rapidly. This is not unpleasant. I'll take that as a compliment, Perrin said. The bioluminescent one, whose name was Aru, leaned forward. You slept in a box under the sand during a storm. That is not a survival method used by any species we have recorded. Every kid who grows up near a floodplain learns to dig, Perrin said. It's not heroic. It's just basic instinct. But you applied it on a planet you had never visited. I didn't need to know the planet. I needed to know the problem. Kullish tilted his head. You see problems differently. I see them like puzzles. Get enough pieces, you find the edge. Tovek grunted. You're still weird. Good. I'd hate to be boring. The station settled into a rhythm over the next few days. Systems stabilized. The crew began rotating duties. Perrin taught Aru how to reroute energy through redundant subsystems. Kullish showed him how to sterilize the hydro lines without shutting down the habitat. They learned from each other, awkwardly at first, then with ease. On the 10th day, a shuttle arrived from Central Command. A tall, segmented being disembarked, flanked by 2 drones. The outpost is operational, it said. We expected failure. Sorry to disappoint, Perrin said. You have exceeded projected durability. I get that a lot. The being turned to Tovek. Is this unit replicable? Tovek glanced at Perrin, then back. No, but you might try asking instead of measuring. The being paused. We will consider it. As the shuttle departed, Perrin watched from the observation window. The stars stretched beyond the frame, each one a place someone else had probably left in a hurry. Kullish approached. You are returning? Not yet. There's still a vent in habitat 4 that whistles every 3rd cycle. It's driving me insane. Then we are fortunate you remain. Perrin nodded. Just don't let anyone stick me in another desert. No promises. They stood side by side in silence. 2 species that shouldn't have understood each other, sharing a view that belonged to neither. And for once, nothing was broken.